The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and we're going to continue our conversation about the 250th anniversary of the United States. Then later on the pod, we sat down with Dr. Randall Balmer, who is an expert on religion's role in the American experiment. It is a great pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, for better or worse,
Yes.
we are all things red, white, and blue this weekend.
Indeed, we are.
So I just want to know, have you decided or prepared what you're bringing to the backyard barbecue?
No, I have not.
Do you have any idea what we are collectively contributing to the backyard barbecue this weekend?
I'm going to be bringing myself.
Yeah. See, folks, here we go. This just yet another example.
Oh, my
When
gosh.
men get
Here we
married,
go. Here
they
we
get to
go.
wash their hands of responsibilities.
Oh, my
We
goodness.
take on more. Anywho, I digress. Also,
That is another episode.
patriarchy, but whatevs. Okay.
Well, that's what we're celebrating this week anyway, right? 250 years of patriarchy.
I mean, pretty much white patriarchy if we're going to be
yeah, we'll
zoom
get
in
even
a little
zoom
bit.
in. Yeah, exactly.
So, carrying on with our
Mhm.
little series we've been doing leading up to the 250th
It's been
birthday
Yankee Doodle Dandy.
of our nation. Right. We are revisiting some moments in history like on this week because we are Good Faith Weekly. So
Right.
we've just been going over some fun facts, things that happened, kind of examining what we've done right, wrong, just our history in general. So,
Sure.
so you ready for this week?
I am ready.
I'm going to break my own rules.
Mhm.
We're going to begin with a not necessarily this week fact, but rather on July 4th.
Okay.
So, and probably not what you're thinking right now, but July 4th marks the day that not just two that we famously know of, but three U.S. presidents have passed away. Two in 1826 and one in 1831. Do you know who they were? I know you know two.
I know two of them. That's Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They died on the same day, and they were trying to outlive one another. But what was the year the third one died?
1831,
1831.
if you'll recall.
Yes, just barely. I'm going to say Johnson.
No, James Monroe
James Monroe.
passed away on July 4th, 1831. So I think that's really interesting. We've
Yeah.
had, 47 presidents now?
Mhm.
And three of them have passed on July 4th.
That is
Anyways,
very
I
interesting.
feel like that's kind of weird. But anywho, so continuing on about John Adams, if he were alive today, he would tell you July 2nd is our actual Independence Day. So, other founding fathers would say July 4th. So
Right.
for those who may not recall why this is that officially the Continental Congress declared its freedom from Great Britain on July 2nd, 1776, when it voted to approve the resolution declaring that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
God bless America.
Right. So after voting on independence on July 2nd, the Continental Congress then needed to draft a document explaining the move to the public, and as committee work goes, it took a couple of days for them to agree on edits. So once approved, the Declaration of Independence that lists the date of July 4th, 1776, was submitted to the printer. And fun fact, 200 copies were ordered, and 26 are known to still be in existence today.
Wow.
So-
That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, so maybe time to clean out the attic and see if
See if there's one up there. Yeah. I don't think it made it all the way to Oklahoma.
I don't think so. But I say all of this to say, henceforth, to honor both occasions, I will be observing both July 2nd and July 4th as Independence Days and thus taking those days off work.
I don't remember that time off request coming in.
It's not a request. It's a government,
It's a government
holiday.
holiday.
That's
Okay.
right. We got it.
So all of a sudden, now you're a big fan of John Adams.
I'm a big fan of patriarchy, white patriarchy, and independence, and we'll just keep celebrating it, right? Okay. Moving on, in 1852, there was kind of a big moment when Frederick Douglass delivered his famous "What to the Slave is the 4th of July" speech.
Oh my gosh.
So before I read a little excerpt of it, I want to say that nearly 600 people attended at New York's Corinthian Hall, and they paid 12.5 cents per ticket, which I found interesting and did some, calculating. And that's about the equivalent of $5.12 today, which is not terrible for a ticket. However, it would have been enough at that time to buy a full meal at a tavern.
Okay.
I don't know why that kind of thing fascinates me, but it does.
Well, Douglas is extremely interesting to me because he is one of our historic figures that I did not hardly know about at all growing up. I mean, he's not mentioned in my textbooks growing up, in history books. He may have had a sentence or two dedicated to him in my high school history books.
Right.
But I didn't know about his background, his writings, his extensive lobbying as an abolitionist, as well as fighting for African-American rights in this country until I was an adult. And he is remarkable. I mean, just astounding, and is a huge presence in the life of this country. Someone that should be honored and revered on this 250th anniversary.
I agree. And we're continuing to learn about him. In fact, just last weekend, we were on a road trip and listening to some podcasts about American history that talked extensively about him. I found it all very fascinating. I think to do him justice, I will read a little excerpt from his speech. It says, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your national greatness, swelling vanity, and your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgiving, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages."
Wow.
I just find that speech interesting and sort of timeless.
Yeah, absolutely.
In many ways.
Yeah, we need a Douglas again today.
We really do. We really do. So that happened this week in 1852. So moving on to 1937, we've got a couple of things that are just completely random in American history. But Minnesota-based Hormel introduces a canned lunch meat and calls it Spam. Right?
God bless America.
We were just talking to somebody about Spam the other day, which I didn't know stands for spiced ham. So, of course, it spawned annual festivals like Spam Jam and Spamorama and such things. So
Yeah, spiced ham might be a stretch. Maybe spiced hamish.
I don't know that I've ever had it. I don't know that I ever will. But apparently there's also Spam sculpture carving that happens.
I've heard of this.
Think dragons, Elvis, Spam Yodas. I don't know. This is a whole subculture I was unaware of, but I think that's pretty funny.
That's what I'm going to be bringing to the backyard barbecue this
Is
weekend.
it?
Yeah.
Carved Spam?
Yeah, carved
Okay,
Spam,
got it. Okay, so in 1946, another completely random fun fact, and this one actually didn't happen in the United States, but I wanted to bring it up anyways because I thought it was funny. In 1946, the bikini, as we know it today, was introduced by French designer Louis Riard.
Oh,
Isn't
God
that
bless
funny?
the French.
Right. Yes, as you can, and of course, you'd had the two pieces you see in kind of old vintage videos, but it was like the really high bottoms. It still covered much. This was the one with the triangles,
those French, they're so risque.
Right. So as you can imagine, it was pretty controversial in the United States, but has obviously made its way quite popularly here.
Well,
Yeah, it reminded me, I don't know, several years ago when our kids were little, our oldest was sitting on the couch, reading through the internet or whatever. He said, "Hey, Mom," he's reading this article. He's like, "Did you know that this year the bikinis are out and those onesie bathing suits are back in?" I was like, that was the way he described the one piece, the onesie bathing suit. So yeah, it's like, We heard it there first.
Yep.
So, okay, moving on from the random and
Mhm.
useless category.
Right.
Here's a big one. In 1964, this week, U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson signs into law the historic Civil Rights Act,
Mm.
which was, of course, the most sweeping civil rights legislation passed by Congress since the post-Civil War Reconstruction era.
Yeah.
It specifically prohibited racial discrimination in employment and education and outlawed racial segregation in public places such as schools, buses, parks, and swimming pools. And it, of course, laid the groundwork for a number of other pieces of legislation, including the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which we talked about a little bit last week, as well as legislation that enforces equal rights for women, as well as all minorities and LGBTQIA+ folks.
Yeah. Still, two of the most important pieces of legislation that were passed and became bills in the United States. And it just pains me to see both of those bills being dismantled by the current court structure.
Mhm.
It is just, I mean, Martin Luther King, John Lewis, all of them, Abernathy, I mean, just all of them would be turning over in their graves to see what's going on today because they gave their blood, sweat, and tears and lives for this cause. And here we have a Supreme Court and advocates overturning a lot of what they stood for.
It just reminds me, I don't know, leading up to July 4th, I've been talking it up to a lot of folks lately, but the musical stuffs that we've talked
Mhm.
about before about this women's fight for the right to vote.
Yep.
And there's a line in one of the songs that says, progress is possible, not guaranteed.
Right.
And it's, again, just a lesson we are learning way too late.
Mhm.
And so,
100%.
complacency gets us nowhere
Yeah.
and slides us backwards.
Yep.
Okay, so kind of moving on to some more cultural things. In 1984, something happened that impacted me and caused great angst, but not you. 1984, want to take any kind of a guess?
Bangs were came back in.
You know what? I'll give you a point for that one. That's actually a great guess. No, but the Motion Picture Association of America introduces a new rating.
Oh no.
PG-13.
13. Oh, you couldn't go to the movie with me.
Well, for a number of reasons at that time. But yes, I just remember when, getting to that age where you could go to the movies by yourself with friends, but you weren't quite 13. I
Right.
just remember thinking, how are we going to sneak in? The 16-year-old selling the ticket
Didn't
could have
care.
cared
Couldn't
less.
care less.
Did I know that? No.
No.
So anyways, you want to take a guess as to what was the first movie receiving that rating?
Oh my gosh. Goonies.
No, but good guess. No, the film Red Dawn starring
Oh, Red Dawn.
Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen was the
Yeah.
first ever PG-13 movie.
That's when we were certain that the Russians were invading America.
That's right. So do you remember when, IMDb and all these websites started doing reviews of movies, and there was kind of the one, what was it called, the Mormon Moms review or
Yeah.
whatever, where they would go
Oh,
and they
yeah,
would
yeah,
list out. So we would be, discussing whether to take our boys to
Right.
see a certain movie, and then we'd hear them from the other room going, "Hey, it only contains 5 F words, 1 boob, and somebody's butt. Can we go?" And it just
I do remember
was
that.
kinda like,
Oh my gosh.
why even bother
Well,
having this discussion?
exactly.
So it was kind of a funny thing. Okay, so the next two are cultural, but are monumental societal changes.
Okay.
In 1994, Princeton graduate and entrepreneur Jeff Bezos founded Cadabra, which is initially just an online bookstore run out of his garage in Bellevue. Bezos later changes the name to, of course,
Amazon.
yes, and grows to become a global retail behemoth, the everything store we all know and love and
And
hate
hate at the same
today.
time, yeah.
So I've just fundamentally changed so much of our culture. I don't think anybody could argue that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So the next moment, I know you will remember.
All right. Shoot.
So this week in 2007, standing in our kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
your mother and I pooled all of our money together.
Oh my gosh. I know exactly where you're going with this.
So what came out this week in 2007?
The iPhone.
It
did. Wow. Now, you talked about Amazon changing
Mhm.
everything. I contend the iPhone revolutionized not only technology, but made technology an extension of the human condition.
Mhm.
And it was one simple decision that Steve Jobs made, and that was to use your finger instead of a stylus.
And tell us why that is.
Because when you decided that, you touched it,
Mhm.
and it became an extension of your self-identity. And anytime you are without your phone these days, I mean, and this goes computer,
Mhm.
iPad, watch, none of this compares to a phone.
Right.
You don't have your phone, you feel like a part of you is missing.
1,000%.
And I think it is because you touch it.
Right. So in addition to all those great historical moments we talked about, I think those two we can kind of laugh off, but we can't.
Right,
Those
exactly.
have changed society
No.
and changed the world
No.
for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, both of those, I mean, those are printing press moments. I mean, the
Mhm.
Gutenberg press obviously changed the world. And I would say those two moments really changed the world. And, I'd also have to say, when Zuckerberg launched Facebook, I mean, it just sent social media, into a frenzy.
But that didn't happen on this week, so
It
we're
did
not
not.
going to talk about it.
Yeah. So we won't talk about it. You're right. You're right. So yeah, lots happened. Hey, this has been fun.
It has been fun. I'm not sure if we'll continue it or not, but I've enjoyed kind of learning and reading and seeing a kind of an overarching pattern of events and things that have been, at times discouraging, but then other times, offered a little bit of hope.
Right, absolutely. Well, speaking of hope, it is, as we have already stated, the country's 250th anniversary. And we thought there is no other person that we would rather have on the show this week than Dr. Randall Balmer.
Absolutely. He is, as we mentioned, a professor at Dartmouth. And one of the great tragedies of COVID is that our son, who was a student at Dartmouth because of COVID and
Mhm.
Dr. Balmer's, schedule, did not ever get to take his class. And I hate that because I know he is a favorite professor there. And he's also a favorite guest of our show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we sat down with Dr. Balmer to talk about religion's role in the 250 years of our country's history. It is a fascinating conversation. I promise you, you're going to learn something from Dr. Balmer.
And I just want props for the last question
It's a
I
great
asked
question.
him.
It is a great question.
Okay.
So stay tuned. Missy and I will be right back with Dr. Randall Balmer.
I'm Starlette Thomas, the director of the Raceless Gospel Initiative at Good Faith Media, troubling the waters of our baptism until there is a miraculous sign of Christian unity. Like clockwork, the North American church remains segregated at 11 a.m. sharp, which is hypocrisy, and ensures we will be late for the kingdom coming. Known more for dividing and conquering, I am preparing a place free from white body supremacy, a kind of dress rehearsal for the great banquet that Jesus spoke of. No reservations needed, just get washed up down by the riverside, and know that if you form a line, then there will be a reordering. The first will be last. To learn more about a raceless gospel for ex-colored people who believe we are all somebody, visit goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us this week. Dr. Randall Balmer, an Episcopal priest and New York Times bestselling author, teaches religion in North America at Dartmouth College. He is a CNN contributor, the author of more than a dozen books, and his commentaries appear in newspapers across the country. In 2024, the American Academy of Religion gave him the Marty Award for the public understanding of religion. Dr. Balmer, welcome back to Good Faith Weekly.
Always good to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Balmer, yes, welcome to your 5th visit.
Wow, number
Is it? Oh, my.
5.
On Good Faith Weekly. Sorry, we do not have a smoking jacket for you, but we're working on it. Maybe next time. So today we want to talk about our nation's 250th anniversary, and in particular, religion's role over those last 250 years. However, I'm a firm believer that no origin story begins with the first breath. So before we get into the 250 years, let's go back prior to 1776. And let's talk about, in particular, how religion impacted Europe's invasion of the Americas and the development of the, air quotes, New World.
Well, I think what's profound, the people coming to the New World certainly came with their religious views and their religious convictions. And what I find fascinating when I teach my course on religion in North America, I typically project a map of the Atlantic colonies, and I asked the students what religious groups settled in various geographical areas. And what's so striking to me is the multiplicity of religious groups that we have. We all think about New England as being a hotbed of Puritanism, and of course it was, but you also had the Pilgrims who came 10 years before the Puritans arrived. And you also had the arrival of Quakers, and they were not terribly welcome in Puritan Massachusetts. You head south to what is now Connecticut, and you had another band of Puritans there. And in Rhode Island, you had a haven of religious toleration. This is the origins of the Baptist tradition in North America with Roger Williams, who was a strong advocate of church-state separation as well as liberty of conscience. You had west from there to New Netherland, New York, Dutch Reformed Church, but you also had French Protestants known as Huguenots, had some Moravians, you had some Quakers on Long Island, some Lutherans up in the Hudson Valley. And after 1654, you have Jews in the New World. Heading south from there, you have in Delaware, what is now Delaware, of all things, Swedish Lutherans. I mean, who knew? Pennsylvania was a place of religious freedom and toleration. William Penn's Holy Experiment, he was a Quaker himself, and of course he wanted Quakerism to flourish there as it did in the colonial period. But he also opened it up to other religious groups, including a lot of German groups, Amish, Mennonites, and my favorite group, the Schwenkfelders, which are still around up north of Philadelphia. Heading south from there, you have English Catholics in Maryland, although they soon gave way to Puritans and to Anglicans. And in the south, you had Church of England, but also a lot of folk religious practices, Moravians, there in North Carolina before some of them moved up to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And if you go even beyond the the American colonies, south of that, Florida, you have Spanish Catholics. So you had a real laboratory of religious diversity in the colonial period. So within that laboratory, you had, I think it's fair to say, probably varying levels of religious ardor among these various groups. We think of the Puritans as being hyper-religious, and they were, but they began to lose that by the end of the 17th century, for example. The Dutch were probably a little less ardent in some of their religious views, but all told, the colonies were a hotbed of religion, and that prevailed even after the First Amendment and the Constitution, but I expect we'll get to that question later.
Will you speak for a moment as you talk about kind of the diversity in religion in the colonies, but going back, will you speak a little bit to how the doctrine of discovery or the doctrine of Christian discovery might have influenced this makeup and their thought process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a mixed bag. A lot of religious groups used the notion of evangelism or conversion of the so-called savages and Native Americans of various stripes as one of the reasons for their settling in the New World. But I think even with the Puritans, you can't discount economic motivations as being part of that picture as well. So again, I think there are varying degrees of ardor depending on which group you're talking about. In Delaware, for example, Sweden wanted to establish a trading entrepot in the New World, and that gave rise to the formation of what is now Delaware. And so Swedish Lutherans were kind of an afterthought in that respect.
Interesting.
You spell out the complexities of this new world as it begins to develop, and obviously, after 1491, 1492, there begins this influx of Europeans. 1443 is when the doctrine of discovery is actually created in the Papal Bull, but then you have all of these groups showing up on the East Coast of North America. And, what we're taught as kids, Dr. Balmer, is that all of these Europeans were fleeing religious persecution. Yeah. And they arrived here at the shores, to live out their faith and to be free. But in this strange formula and complex equation that is the New World, what we discover is that while they left one persecution, another persecution began to emerge because of the depth of complexity of the faiths.
No, absolutely. And the Puritans are the best example of that. People talk about the Puritans fleeing the old world, that is England, in order to find religious freedom, but they were very quick to deny it to anybody else
Right.
than themselves. And so when the Quakers show up and begin trying to evangelize the Puritans, and you can imagine how that landed. They start persecuting the Quakers, and they hang 4 Quakers in on Boston Common. So it doesn't work all that well when we're talking about kind of religious freedom or toleration in a kind of blank check
Right.
in describing what's happening out in the colonies.
And of course, that leads us to the celebration this week, the 250th anniversary of the United States. Now, back during the Revolutionary period, especially when the Constitution was formed and the Bill of Rights was debated, I mean, the idea of religion's role in society, especially its relationship with government, was hotly debated. So,
Yes.
walk us through kind of that lead up, that conversation the founding fathers and mothers had to, solidify those first 16 words that are now known as, our First Amendment right.
That's a great question, and it's really a foundational question. Uh, First of all, I want to point out that the formula that the founders agreed upon was an utterly new idea. The whole notion that you could construct a secular government without the interlocking buttress of religion was entirely foreign. I use that word advisedly,
Yeah.
to anyone in the Western world. The two were seen as being inseparable. But when the founders were considering how to define that interaction, they had to contend with 2 very important factors. The first is what I just described. That is to say, the extraordinary religious complexity in the colonies themselves. So if they were to designate, say, the Church of England as the state church, well, first of all, that probably wouldn't have happened because of the American Revolution,
Right,
right?
right.
Uh, Being English was not exactly fashionable at
Right,
that
sure.
time among the colonists. That the people in New England, Puritans who were by then Congregationalists, wouldn't have cottoned to that idea. If they decided that the Baptists would be the state church, the established religion, well, you can imagine that the Dutch Reformed or the Anglicans or the Presbyterians would not be happy with that at all. And by the way, I forgot to mention the Presbyterians in my scheme of the American
Can't
colonies, so I
forget the
apologize for
Presbyterians.
that. New Jersey primarily, yes. Um, and if they decided that Unitarianism was the state church, everyone would have been unhappy with that formulation. So that was it. That was one of the factors. The other factor, going back farther, was that the founders were well aware of the ways in which religion had really tortured many people. I mean, quite literally, but also figuratively. That is to say, the attempts to arrive at a single understanding of religion, especially after the Protestant Reformation, were fraught. So you had the wars of religion in France. Before that, you had the 30 Years' War that convulsed Europe. You had the English Revolution, which in many ways was a religious uprising. So the founders were well aware of that. So they wanted to avoid that sort of contestation in the New World. And in so doing, they seized upon the ideas of Roger Williams, the founder of the Baptist tradition in America, who back in 1644 had argued for separating the garden of the church from the wilderness of the world by means of a wall of separation. And that is the metaphor that they drew upon in setting up this new configuration of religion and politics, church and state in the New World. And Well, I'll leave it at that
Yeah.
for right.
I mean, even the last couple of weeks, even in the Oval Office, I heard Texas Attorney General Dan Patrick, say out loud behind the president's desk that anybody who tells you the separation of church and state is in the Constitution, they're a liar. They're not telling you the truth. And so, could you address that? Because I mean, yes, technically the words are not in those first 16, but the spirit of those words are definitely embedded in those first 16.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the canards that has been propagated by Dan Patrick, as you say, the lieutenant governor in Texas. But he gets a lot of that from David Barton, who's this faux historian about early America. And what's ironic about that is that Dan Patrick and David Barton and this crowd, they claim to be originalists in their approach to the Constitution, right? Wanting to understand how the original laws came into being and so forth, and interpreting them in their original context. So let's look at that statement. Yes, I will give that point to Dan Patrick and David Barton and others. The phrase separation of church and state does not occur in the Constitution. They're absolutely right about that. However, any common sense reading of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The plain meaning is separation of church and state. The phrase itself comes from none other than Thomas Jefferson. Again, we're talking about originalism here. He's pretty original when it comes to the Constitution. Right? And the phrase comes, as I'm sure you know, from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut on New Year's Day, 1802. And they had been quizzing the president and wanting to find his views on the relationship between church and state. So he writes back, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of holy American people that states, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here because I don't have the text in front of me. And then he quotes from the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, end quote, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So again, these folks claim to be originalists. You can't get much more original than Thomas Jefferson. And I'd go a step further and to invoke the Treaty of Tripoli, which was negotiated at the end of George Washington's administration, sent to Congress for ratification by John Adams with his endorsement, read aloud before the Senate, and ratified unanimously on June 7th, 1797. Article 11 reads, the first part of it, which is the relevant part, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Then it goes on, but that's the crucial phrase here. As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That's a pretty clear statement, and that's pretty original too. 1797 is pretty original.
Well, I think as we can surmise, there's a group of people, including the ones you're just talking about, who don't really enjoy reputable sourcing. So as you're quoting sources, therein lies part of the problem. But moving on, Dr. Balmer, it's really impossible to talk about the history of our country without discussing race. So will you talk for a moment about the way religion has impacted our relationship, our progress, our lack of progress in regards to race?
Oh boy. Yeah, that's a vexed question, and it's a vexed issue. There's no question about that. I was just reading this wonderful new book by Kevin Sack about Mother Emanuel, the church where you had the terrible shooting some years ago, and reminding myself about the origins of the Methodist Episcopal Church, now known as the United Methodist Church, the denomination. And the Methodist Episcopal Church was founded in 1784 with a strong statement against slavery, against slaveholding, but they backed away from that in deference to the southern states. And so you have this, really kind of mixed moral legacy of Methodism in this country over the issue of slavery. The Quakers are probably the only group that really come off fairly well. when it comes to the issue of slavery. They were the first religious group as a body to come out against slavery and maintain that prophetic witness through the early years of the Society of Friends. But too often, as with the run-up to the Civil War, Southern Baptist Convention in 1845, for example, splits North and South over the issue of slavery. Among the Methodists, there was accommodation to slavery among the Methodists in the South. That led to the split between North and South among the Methodists, and also eventually to the formation of the Free Methodist Church and the Wesleyan Methodist Church and so forth as witnesses, as beacons against slavery. So again, I think it's impossible to conclude that religion, and particularly Christian denominations, have a mixed record when it comes to race and to slavery. Martin Luther King observed, of course, famously, that the most segregated hour in America was 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and sadly, that hasn't changed too much since he made that observation.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Balmer, it seems as though religion is always constantly in the news, even today. Obviously, we've got this storied history of complexity about the relationship between religion and politics and the culture at large. But today, especially, it seems to take a prevalent role in our conversations. And, for those of us who have been watching religion's role, especially those who decry the religious fundamentalist kind of takeover of certain political parties in this country and trying to implement their religious beliefs upon all of us. We've seen that take place over decades. But it also is interesting to note that it seems as though more progressive parties are starting to embrace religion. We see Raphael Warnock, U.S. Senator from Georgia. We see James Tallarico, who's a candidate in Texas. So can you talk to us about the role of religion today, 250 years after the founding? It seems to be as complicated and complex as ever, but it also seems to take on some nuance as well.
I think that's true. Yeah. First of all, I think the reason that we're even having this conversation in some ways has to be attributed to the fact that the First Amendment has worked. That is to say that we have a vibrant, vital, salubrious religious culture in this country, I think precisely because of the First Amendment, because the government has, at least for the most part, stayed out of the religion business. So you have this free marketplace. And by the way, Adam Smith, his foundational book about capital markets, about free market capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, one of the examples he used was religion, arguing that if the government took a neutral stand toward religion, just as he advocated government taking a neutral stand toward the economy and economic markets, that religion would flourish. And I think his prediction is absolutely right. I mean, it keeps me employed, so I'm very happy about it. I wouldn't have a job if it were not for the First Amendment, I would argue. So yes, religion is a very much important part of our conversation. I think one of the reasons, and it's not necessarily a good reason, is that for many Americans, religion is a shortcut or a proxy for morality.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say, when it comes to politics, we want to know, at least some of us want to know from time to time at least, whether or not our politicians are good, decent, moral people. This was especially true after Watergate, and I expect, frankly, it's becoming true again with the current administration. And so the shorthand is to ask, are you religious, or what is your religious feeling? Well, it's not a very good question, because we all know people who have no avowed religious sympathies, but who nevertheless are good, decent, moral, ethical people. So it's not a very good question. But that religion functioning as a proxy for morality, I think, has become part of our political discourse, I think. And again, it waxes and wanes according to historical circumstances. What you're now seeing, as you rightly point out, is people from the political left using religion, and I think not disingenuously in the case of James Tallarico, or certainly not in the case of Raphael Warnock, who's a former student, by the way. They, they're invoking their faith, and they're doing so, I think, at an important moment. And I think this is a good thing. It is a tacit argument that the right wing, whether it comes to religion or politics, does not have the conversation to itself. And so people like Ken Paxton, who's, well, let's start. I think it's significant and important that
Right.
Tallarico is using the language of faith and religion, especially because it's at least as far as I can. I've never met him or had a conversation with him, but as far as I can see, it's sincere, and it's based on a real understanding of the faith.
Right.
He's not simply tripping off these catchphrases in order to win the religious vote.
So, Dr. Balmer, what would you say to those critics who say, the religious right, that's all they're doing. They are allowing their faith to guide their politics. Is there a delineation between what we see on the right with religion's relationship with the right versus religion's relationship with the left?
Oh, I think there is. There's a clear, absolutely. One of the recurring myths about Americans, and particularly American Protestants, is that we are all biblicists. That we read the Bible literally. We interpret the Bible literally. Well, my rejoinder to that is that most of us engage in what I call the ruse of selective literalism when it comes to the body, to the Bible, and I think you see that rather dramatically in political discourse. So you have people on the right. I'm trying to think what they actually do quote.
It's not from the Bible.
Well,
Again, with the reputable sources.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's some sort of jerry-rigged ideological pablum. I guess I'm exposing myself as a bit of a partisan here, and I apologize for that. But let me talk about the left a little bit. I mean, people like Raphael Warnock and James Tallarico are quoting the Bible when Jesus, and as well as the Hebrew Bible, talks about welcoming the strangers. Well, certainly that should have some bearing on immigration policy, as complicated as borders are and state sovereignty are, and I acknowledge all of that. But at least that should be part of that conversation. When Jesus talks about caring for the least of these, visiting prisoners, feeding the hungry, taking care of the poor, I mean, that should be part of our political discourse. And the people on the left, the aforementioned Raphael Warnock and James Tallarico, are starting to do that. And I welcome that. That is part of the political discourse.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. So, Dr. Balmer, as we wrap up this interview, I have a few sort of rapid fire, more casual questions. So from this point forward, Randall, if that's okay, we're going to go with that. So I have just kind of some fun questions. If you need a minute to think about your answers, that's totally fine. We can edit that out later. But I want to go back 250 years. You're in the room. The free exercise and establishment clauses are being discussed. What input would you have given? And is there anything you would want to clarify or perhaps add?
I probably wouldn't add anything. I think the language of the First Amendment is really quite beautiful. If I were part of that conversation, what I would point out is what I think we often miss about Roger Williams' metaphor. And I think I probably said this before on one of our conversations, and so I apologize for repeating myself. But what I think we miss in that notion about separating the garden of the church from the wilderness of the world is that Roger Williams was not a wilderness advocate. He was not a member of the Sierra Club. That is to say, for him and for his contemporaries, wilderness was a place of darkness where evil lurked. And so when he talks about separating the garden of the church from the wilderness of the world, his principal concern, I think, was the integrity of the faith, keeping the faith from being compromised by too close an association with the state. So again, if I were in that conversation, I would probably point that out in relationship to Roger Williams' famous metaphor.
You have said that before, but I'm so glad you did again, because I had, of course, forgotten. But that's such a great, it's such an impactful analogy and such an important point that you bring up as we imagine these things in our minds and what these moments were like and what was going on in the minds of the founding fathers. So thank you for that. Okay, so my next question would be, what are a couple of moments or perhaps events that are not commonly taught in history classes that you feel every American should know?
I think one would be Richard Allen's departure from St. George's Methodist Church in Philadelphia to form the African Methodist Episcopal Church, because Richard Allen, who was a freed slave who had purchased his freedom, was being discriminated against in this Methodist congregation, and so he set out on his own, rather unwillingly, frankly, but he was separated from the Methodist Church and started his own Free African Society, which became the African Methodist Episcopal Church. The second event that probably does not get enough coverage is when members of the National Reform Association, with their proposal to amend the Constitution to add all sorts of Christian language into the preamble of the Constitution, visited Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War and pressed their case before Abraham Lincoln. He dismissed them, saying that the work of amending the Constitution should not be undertaken lightly. And he was able to turn away that first major attempt to declare the United States a Christian nation. I think that's an important event that probably doesn't get enough coverage.
Yeah,
no, that's very
absolutely.
Important. Okay, two more. Can't decide which one to save for the end. But one thing I really appreciate about your writing is that you do offer several just short, easily digestible books with just so much historical information about faith in our country. In fact, as I was preparing for today, I was going back and re-listening to Bad Faith, and I really enjoyed it again. I've compiled a list of a few, and this may not be comprehensive, but I'm going to list them off really quick. Saving Faith, How American Christianity Can Reclaim Its Prophetic Voice, Bad Faith, Race and the Rise of the Religious Right, America's Best Idea, The Separation of Church and State, The Making of Evangelicalism, From Revivalism to Politics and Beyond, and Solemn Reverence, The Separation of Church and State in American Life, Truth to Power. If we could tell people to start with one of those books, and I picked those that were either under 200 words or under 2-hour listen, what one should they pick up first?
I think the one that's probably most relevant today is the most recent one, which is America's Best Idea.
Okay.
I think the nation is under real attack today, facing a great peril from the so-called Christian nationalists. And by the way, I'm not sure that those terms belong together, but America's Best Idea was an attempt to refute this fiction that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. That's demonstrably false, and I tried to make that case in America's Best Idea.
There you go.
All right. Well, that's the one I will now make sure I recommend to folks. Okay, my last question, and I'm so excited to hear your answer. The president calls, and he invites you to the Great American State Fair. He gives you 60 seconds at the podium, which incidentally is the amount of time he's able to stay awake. What
Ouch.
What do you say to the tens of people in the audience?
The tens of people? I would quote Theodore Parker, who was often quoted by Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I would say that we are living in a perilous moment where we've lost sight of this. That arc is stalled at the moment. It's probably bending in the other direction at the moment, but that we should not lose hope. And that I have every confidence that the American people will learn once again to trust their better instincts and to realign themselves with the arc of the moral universe.
All right, I think you got it under time. So
I think I did. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Balmer, thank you so much for joining us on this very important week in the life of our country. This may be the most important More to Tell question that we've ever asked. So you know what's coming. You've answered this question 4 times already, but Missy has the honor of asking it, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
And like a good preacher, you can recycle a sermon. That's
right. I've done that once or twice.
So, Dr. Balmer, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
I think in the past I've said that history is important, and I stand by that. But I'll expand that to say that truth is important. And we live in a moment where we are desperate for truth. The number that keeps floating back into my head is 30,573. And that's the number of documented false or misleading statements that Donald Trump issued in his first term as president in 4 years. 30,573. So I think it's more important than ever to be a truth teller.
Yeah.
And that would be what I think is more to the story at this moment.
Randall Balmer, professor, prophet, priest, and truth teller. Thank you so much for being on Good Faith Weekly.
My pleasure as always. God bless.
Missy and I will be back next week. And until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.